Hello and welcome HillmonTok University students. I want to welcome you to the summer session. I am Dr. Angela Johnson and I will be your instructor for Womanist Capitalism. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. My academic credentials include a doctorate in multicultural women and gender studies, as well as a master's degree and an MBA. But what I want you to know, besides all of those degrees, is that my research has been dedicated to interrogating and reconceptualizing the intersections of socioeconomic inequality, historical power structures, and wealth accumulation paradigms, particularly as those wealth accumulations relate to the contributions of women in communities of color. So I'm glad you're here to talk about the contributions of women and communities of color and how we can kind of change this narrative, turn it upside down on what it means to be a womanist capitalist. So my theory posits that economic systems must transcend mere profit generation to embrace a more holistic, philanthropic, so love for humanity ethos centered on how do we flourish as human beings, as well as be good to the environment. So in short, that was very academic, and I promise you the rest of this class won't be as academic, but definitely informative. I advocate for a transformative approach to how we go about earning money. So how we go about every day making a living, making it work for our families, what we do in our communities to make them a better place. And I know my perspective, I don't think is far out there, but I know it does challenge conventional capitalist frameworks. So today we're going to explore the foundations of capitalism, not just as an economic system, but also as a social structure rooted in power dynamics. So as we begin this journey together, I want us to keep a key question in mind throughout this actually entire semester. And I want you to think about the fact that capitalism, is it just about markets or is it more about power? And this leads us to other critical questions that I want us to keep in mind this semester. So when we say capitalism was born or capitalism is doing XYZ, who do we leave out of this discussion? And who profits when lives are reduced just to mere labor? And I want us to think about whose bodies built the world's wealth and whose bodies continue to build the world's wealth. And as you think about those questions, I'm reminded of a quote from Audre Lorde, who says there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So throughout this course, we will examine capitalism through multiple lenses: economic, social, racial, but also gendered, to fully understand its impact not only on our world, but our own personal lives. So with that, let's dive in. I want to begin talking about or giving us an adequate foundation. So I want to talk about capitalism. Capitalism is often defined simply as an economic system based on private ownership and free markets. We hear that all the time: free markets, free markets. But that definition, I think, misses something crucial. So throughout this course, I'm going to draw from my favorite scholars like Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, Anna Louise Keating, as well as a business scholar specifically on capitalism, and his name is Thomas Piketty. But I feel like from those scholars, we need to understand capitalism as a social as well as a psychic. And if I got into womanist theology, I would say a spiritual structure rooted in racialized, gendered domination. So we need to understand capitalism and that it is rooted in racialized, engendered domination. And I want to start by talking about the triangular trade here, which represents what we might call the original modern algorithm for wealth building, especially as it relates to the United States of America. We say America, or we say we are Americans, but we leave out a whole swath of the continent of North America, South America, as well as Central America when we say that as United States citizens. So this trade network that we see here on the screen, it connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. So North America, South America, Central America, in a cycle of exploitation. And slave labor was forcibly taken from Africa. We know this story. Raw materials like cotton and sugar or tobacco were produced in the colonies, and the profits were extracted and concentrated in European markets. So you see this triangle here from Africa to the Americas, and then wealth back to, or goods that created wealth back to the European markets. And I want, for the sake of brevity here, to just talk more specifically about the crop of cotton. Now, I know there were other crops that were being produced like sugar and tobacco that I mentioned previously, but I want us to talk specifically about cotton. And I want us to think about the fact that cotton wasn't just a crop, it was currency. It was produced through racial and gendered violence. Cotton became king because enslaved, primarily black bodies, were made disposable. People were reduced to tools, their humanity denied to serve an economic purpose. And from that denial of their basic humanity, it fueled the Industrial Revolution, and textile manufacturing created an insatiable demand for cotton. And this plantation system was designed to meet that demand at any human cost. Bell Hooks powerfully states white patriarchal capitalism uses difference, so those things that separate us, as a weapon of division and domination. This perspective helps us understand how race and gender were weaponized to justify exploitation and maintain economic control. The cotton economy wasn't just about producing a commodity, it was about maintaining a social order based on white supremacy and patriarchal power by any means necessary. The bodies that picked cotton were converted into economic value, becoming living currency in a system that privileged profit over people. And I'm going to come back to that throughout our time here over the summer, this system that privileges profit over people, because I'm sure we all get up and go to work every day, or we've had a job in our lives where we can see this play out, where the system is privileging profit over people. It's also important to recognize that patriarchal capitalism does not happen by accident. It's an intentional system of domination. Anna Louise Keating speaks of a threshold consciousness, and she says that we must learn to see both and capitalism as both a machine and a moral and an immoral story. So that's three both ands, right? A machine, a moral, and an immoral story. The economic structures have embedded values and assumptions about whose lives matter and whose labor counts. And capitalism doesn't merely produce just wealth, it reproduces, as it's producing wealth, inequality. Thomas Piketty's research confirms this, showing that inequality grows unless intentionally interrupted by policy or social movement. So this class is all about getting us to think about the ways that we can interrupt this policy and provide a social movement. The system, so white patriarchal capitalism, is designed to concentrate wealth at the top while extracting value from those at the bottom. It's not a neutral process, but one that actively maintains hierarchies of race, gender, and class. So I want us to take a few moments for a brief think and share. And I want you to think about the ways that we still see this pattern today in our daily lives. I want you to write your responses in the discussion board, and I want you to respond to some of your classmates' posts in the discussion board. And if you're the first person to respond, I want you to come back and respond to some of your classmates' posts in the discussion board. So I'm going to give you a moment to do that. So some examples that you may have thought of was labor exploitation in global garment factories. Like we all want the latest sneakers, we all want the latest handbag, but do we ever stop to think that predominantly women of color and children work in these unsafe conditions for minimum wages so that we can have the latest sneakers or the latest handbag? We also see it in racialized income gaps that persist despite formal equality under the law. We see it in the way we do care work. So, caring for children, caring for the elderly, caring for our families. All of this work is still done primarily by women. Now, men do this work too, but primarily by women. And I want us to focus on the fact that this work remains undervalued and underpaid. Now, Thomas Piketty reminds us that inequality grows unless it's interrupted. So, how do we interrupt this system? The pattern continues unless we actively challenge it. So, how do we challenge the system? So, I want us to explore how difference is weaponized in capitalism. So, at the top of our pyramid is white patriarchal control, where power is concentrated. Below that, we have weaponized difference, the creation of division through constructed categories like race, gender, nationality, nationality, sexuality, religion. And at the base, we have systemic domination controlled through institutionalized inequality. So the question we must ask is, who gets to define difference? And why do they get to define it? And who benefits from these definitions? And why should they be receiving all of the benefits? And I want you to focus on the fact that when difference is weaponized, human diversity becomes a tool for dividing communities and justifying exploitation. It becomes a tool for dividing race. It becomes a tool for dividing gender. It becomes a tool for dividing religion. It becomes a tool for dividing who's wearing a certain outfit and who's, so the outfit could be jeans and a t-shirt versus who's wearing the suit and the tie. But when we start to justify this exploitation, the othering of certain groups makes it easier to justify paying them less because you're wearing jeans and a t-shirt, denying them rights because you live in a certain part of town, or exploiting their labor. So now let's talk about the intentional system of patriarchal capitalism. Let's talk about the intentional design, and it has 4 key components here. First, it's deliberate. It's a deliberate design. It's not by accident. It was designed on purpose because it was benefiting people. Second, it contains moral complexity. Both moral and immoral narratives justify its existence. And third, it's an inequality generator, reproducing inequality if left unchecked. And fourth, it creates systemic entrenchment, self-reinforcing through institutions. So where we go to work, where we go to church, how we educate our children. This isn't to say that every individual within the system intends harm, but rather that the system itself is designed to produce certain outcomes that benefit some at the expense of others. So I started talking about this beyond either or both and perspectives, but to fully understand capitalism, we need to move beyond either or thinking to a both and perspective. So on one side, we have systems analysis, examining the economic structures and processes, the global patterns of production, and historical development. On the other side, we have a moral analysis, considering human costs and benefits, social implications, and equity considerations. So we must view capitalism through multiple lenses simultaneously. It's not enough to analyze market efficiency, what's my 401k doing today, Can I go out in the markets and trade and make a few dollars? But you can't do that without considering who bears the cost of that efficiency. Similarly, moral critique without systemic understanding can miss opportunities for structural change. So I want us to reimagine capitalism, and I want to cast a womanist vision for capitalism. So what does a womanist capitalism or womanist economics look like? How might we reimagine this system? Well, first, we must identify the exploitation. We must recognize historical and current patterns. Second, we need to transform these structures. We need to replace domination with collaboration. The ones who are closest to the problem, we know this adage, this saying, are the ones who have the solutions. So we need to ask those that are closest to the problem, what are the solutions? And third, we must build new foundations. We need to create an economic system that's based on equality. And I believe a womanist capitalism centers equity as well as solidarity. It recognizes that the economy should serve human needs. It should serve the needs of animals in the planet rather than subordinating humanity or animals or the planet to market logic. It values care work. It values reproductive labor as essential to economic flourishing. And so, in closing, I want us to remind us of an Audre Lorde quote when she says, "Poetry is not a luxury; it is a vital necessity of our existence." Similarly, reimagining our economic system is not a luxury; it's necessary for our collective survival and flourishing. And I'll say that again. It is necessary for our collective survival and flourishing. This class is not just about understanding capitalism. It's about rewriting the script. It's about reweaving the pattern. So for next week, please complete the quiz, Capitalism Then and Now, on our learning management system. And I want you to bring one example of present day labor inequality to discuss in our next session. Thank you for your engagement today. I look forward to our journey together in this course. Have a great rest of your week.